Just a few random thoughts about free will and determinism. Let's talk a little bit about choices. Some people have suggested that there is no free will, but only choice. There's only choices, no free will. And that does seem like a little bit of a flawed assumption. Now, there are choices that can be made in conjunction to free will, but the majority of choices are not chosen by free will, but are mostly a deferment to a programming of distinctions rooted in preferences. First of all, you choose very little. Do you choose the way you walk, the way you breathe, the way your heart beats, or the way your eyes blink? Did you choose the way all the things around you appear? Do you choose your parents, your race, your gender, or your sexuality? The majority of things are beyond your choice. But what about little small choices we make every day? Are you really choosing them? Or are you just simply following the route that is most tailored to your program of biased discriminating preferences? Or to the chemical fluctuations of mood tied into a biological process? A plate of shit or a plate of broccoli? A choice that's not really a choice. Football or baseball? A choice that's really a matter of what you already prefer. What about a choice between things that you think you might not have a preference for consciously? Like, say, for example, who wins a chess game between two people who are strangers to you in some distant location? It may end up being just a matter of your mood or whim. In other words, a random preference generated by your biology. A punch to the left side of your face or a punch to the right side of your face, and then becomes a matter of which you prefer less. So when you boil it down, by and large, people are not really choosing anything, but rather following the preferences of their body or mind. So does this destroy the notion of free will? And if not, then what is free will really? If everything in the universe was absolutely deterministic, including consciousness, awareness, and imagination, there would be no need for self-reflective beings. Instinct is all that is required to function in an absolutely deterministic context. If there is no such thing as free will, then self-reflection is unnecessary and completely useless. There is nothing in a natural system that is useless. Even things that mankind defines as anomalies have a purpose and function. They are just purposes and functions that are not apparent to man. Yet, before the advent of self-reflection, it could be said that the material universe was completely deterministic. And when creatures of instinct appeared in it, it remained deterministic. With instinct, there is no need for free will or the ability to make a choice, for everything happens automatically. There is no thinking going on. A creature is totally reactive to impulse and stimulus. Hunger arises, and the creature is compelled to meet that need, not by thinking or making choices, but by simply following its preset programming, following the cues, beacons, and guidelines conveniently provided by nature to lead the creature into finding the means to an end. If there is no such thing as free will, this is where the story should end. There is no need for any thinking, imagination, or self-reflection for a system such as this to continue on. Natural selection and the survival of the fittest already rules a system like this, and evolution could still be a factor without imagination and self-reflection being thrown into the mix. Now, some have suggested that agency developed to help creatures better scheme and employ cleverness to use as a tool in the fight for survival. But again, there is no need for this. This actually goes against nature's initial blueprint of survival of the fittest and natural selection, where everything is decided by physical attributes. In fact, if human beings had not developed self-reflective, intelligent, imaginative capabilities and still ran on pure instinct, they definitely would not be on the top of the food chain, nor be the dominant species. They would be nothing more than an elegant ape, and the lion would still be reigning supreme. So had it not been for agency, humans would not be in the position they are in right now. Agency allowed a species that is not the fittest to flip the script on natural selection. For humans would not be naturally selected for dominance had it not been for their agency. So why would nature allow this to happen? Why would nature let a weak species surpass other more dominant, stronger species and disrupt a system that had otherwise been running smoothly and without a hitch? Obviously, for the implementation of free will, which definitely is unnecessary in the previously deterministic world. If there is no free will, then there is no necessity to allow any creature to rise above instinct and animal intelligence. Things were running just fine and could have continued to run that way indefinitely. Now, do you realize that if everything in the universe is deterministic, then no one has to take responsibility for a damn thing? And I'm not advocating for that. That's the truth of determinism. And that's the irony of a lot of these modern determinists who discount their own agency on the one hand, and on the other hand speak a lot of noise about what should be, what could be, what decisions are being made, and what's being imposed on the world. In a deterministic paradigm, such suggestions are hypocritical, erroneous fallacies. If everything is deterministic, then there is no decisions, no way to affect change, no way to play God, and no way to impose anything. There isn't even causality. Everything is exactly the way it should be. In fact, there is no other way it could be. So just sit back, relax, and let things continue on as they are. Any ideas of change that you might have had are just that. Predetermined thoughts in your head that are completely futile. If you discount agency, then the dominoes will continue to fall in their progression. The only thing that might alter an unfolding chain of cause and effect would be an agent of free will that could create a new cause that was capable of effecting alterations. But if none such agency exists, then all unfolding causality basically has an invincible force field sustaining it. So then there is no need to take any responsibility. Do whatever you want, for actually, you are doing what you want, but only because that's what's been predetermined. Go ahead and steal, rape, lie, cheat, and murder, because hell, you are not to blame. Determinism made you do it. And while we're at it, we might as well do away with copyrights and intellectual properties, for you are not responsible for the creation of anything. It all belongs to determinism. Is it not obvious that by default, determinism can be used as the ultimate scapegoat? Who needs? The devil made me do it, when you have determinism to blame, which, unlike the devil, is supposedly backed by irrefutable science. And speaking of scapegoats, it's funny how some people try to place the responsibility of a lot of negative aspects of human interaction, such as blaming, guilt, persecution, and scales of superiority, at the feet of free will, as if the idea of free will is what enables all these things. But it couldn't be further from the truth. You can't really blame free will or determinism for these things, although a case could be made more for determinism than free will. It's easier to say I am superior because it's been determined to be that way. It's easier to cast blame, persecute, and assign guilt based on things already being determined to be that way. But if you really want to address these aspects, then the crux of the problem lies in distinction. But I know why a lot of people that cling to the idea of determinism think it's a problem of free will. It's a reaction to the religious dogmatists that claim that God gives man free will to make choices and hence can be judged by his choices. But if such a God really exists, then ironically there is no free will, and it's only yet more determinism. If this God is all-powerful and all-knowing, then he already knows every so-called choice a man will make even before he creates such a man. If God already knows, then it's predetermined and there is no choice. It's more of a matter of a program running its course. And yet it doesn't lessen the guilt, blame, judgment, or persecution, does it? The fault lies with the manufacturer, and yet you are held accountable for something you have no way to account for. Yet in reality, all this doesn't really mean anything, for there is no such God. And the reason all these negative aspects prevail is due to the contrivance of distinctions. In other words, belief in the illusion of separation. The same distinctions that separate man and God. The same distinction that separate free will and determinism. And you know, this is something that both atheists and theists share in common. The belief in separatist distinctions that inevitably end up being the assigning of values. And once you start assigning values, this ends up in an idea of morality, and then moves into law. And once it's law, monkey business ensues. This is where we start getting into ideas of good and bad that don't have any meaning outside of the ones who assign meaning. However, only mattering or having meaning in an existential context are nevertheless applied on all the wrong principles. It's just distinction upon distinction upon distinction upon distinction, all of which is equally empty and unsubstantial. And what's really at the root of this morality and value and law? What's the real precious commodity that's in contention? Attachments. In judgment, guilt, persecution, and punishment are dealt out based on your infringements on other people's attachments, or you clinging to attachments that other people have made a distinction that are bad. So this is why, even if you don't infringe on other people, which, by the way, is flexible based on circumstance, like it's not okay to kill unless sanctioned by a government institution of war, all of which usually has God's stamp of approval on both sides. Even if you manage to navigate these conditions correctly, you still might wind up being persecuted for holding the wrong thoughts, concepts, and belief systems. And it doesn't matter if you or others believe in free will or determinism. As long as distinctions of value and morality and law are in place, you will be judged and punished regardless. And an idea of premeditation doesn't change whether one willfully premeditates or premeditates because it was determined to be that way. You will suffer the same punishment. But free will or determinism are not to blame. It's the mountains of contrived distinctions that give rise to values and morals and laws that are put in place for all the wrong reasons and principles.